It was a gray, misty morning in the trenches of northern France, the kind of morning that seemed to swallow sound and hope alike. The ground was thick with mud, churned by the relentless march of soldiers and the pounding of artillery shells. Smoke from distant explosions hung in the air like a heavy curtain, making it almost impossible to see beyond a few feet. In the middle of this chaos, something extraordinary was happening, something that would soon make a dog a legend, a hero whose name would be whispered among soldiers long after the war ended. The dog, a small, scrappy terrier with a coat muddied by days of rain and battle, darted between the legs of weary soldiers. He was not a trained war dog, nor had he been prepared for the horrors of the battlefield. In fact, he had belonged to no one in particular. He had wandered into the encampment weeks earlier, stealing scraps of food and earning the reluctant affection of those who were too tired or too numb to care about much else. But even in this war-torn land, where despair seemed to hang heavier than the fog, the terrier carried a spirit that refused to be broken. That morning, the soldiers were tense. Word had spread that an enemy patrol was close, and fear had settled over the trenches like a thick, oppressive blanket. Each man clutched his rifle tighter, listening to the distant thunder of artillery, imagining every shadow could conceal a lurking enemy. And then, without warning, the terrier ran ahead, weaving through the mud, his ears perked and eyes sharp. "Don't let him get himself killed," one soldier muttered, half to himself, half to the dog. But the dog ignored the warnings. Something invisible seemed to guide him, some instinct that had nothing to do with training or orders. He sniffed the air, paused, and then barked, sharply, insistently. The sound echoed down the trench, cutting through the damp morning like a bell of warning. The soldiers froze, their heads snapping up. From the fog, figures began to emerge, German soldiers, advancing cautiously, unaware that they had already been seen. The barking dog drew their attention just long enough for the men in the trench to prepare. Rifles rose, and a hail of gunfire met the advancing patrol. The terrier had saved them, not by strength or size, but by courage and intuition. That moment was only the beginning. As the weeks passed, the dog proved himself again and again. He would carry messages between distant posts, navigating no man's land with a precision that amazed even the most hardened soldiers. Many had tried to follow the paths he took, but the terrain was treacherous, and fear paralyzed the bravest of men. Yet the terrier seemed fearless. He bounded through shell craters, leapt over barbed wire, and dodged flying debris as if he belonged to some other world where war did not exist. Sometimes, the dog would return with more than just messages. He had a strange habit of finding the wounded before anyone else did. Soldiers lying in the mud, unnoticed by their comrades in the chaos of battle, would hear the soft padding of paws approaching. And then they would feel the cold, wet nose nudging them, the gentle pressure of a loyal friend refusing to leave. The dog had a way of drawing attention to those who needed help most, alerting medics and comrades alike. Word of the dog spread quickly. By now, he had a name among the men, though it changed from unit to unit. Some called him Sergeant, others Hero, and some simply referred to him as the Little Fighter. Whatever the name, his presence became a symbol of hope, a reminder that bravery did not always come in the form of uniformed soldiers. Even in a war defined by horror and destruction, a small dog could make a difference. One particular day remained etched in the memories of those who witnessed it. An enemy mortar barrage had caught a unit off guard, sending men scrambling for cover. Amidst the confusion, a young soldier had been buried under a collapsed trench wall. Screams for help echoed, but the mud was thick and time was slipping away. Then, as if summoned by fate, the terrier appeared. He began digging frantically, scratching with his paws, barking to draw attention. Soldiers who had been pinned down by fear and exhaustion rushed to help, and together they unearthed the young man. He lived, and many credited the dog for his survival. The terrier's actions were not always so dramatic, but even in the quieter moments, he offered a kind of comfort that the soldiers desperately needed. In the trenches, where letters from home were rare and laughter rarer still, he was a companion who offered loyalty without judgment, who wagged his tail at the faintest smile, and who reminded men that courage could exist in the smallest of forms. By the time the war drew to a close, the dog had become more than just a mascot or a helper. He was a hero, decorated in the hearts of every soldier who had been touched by his bravery. Stories of his deeds were told and retold, growing with each recounting, but the essence of his heroism remained the same: an unwavering spirit in the face of unimaginable danger, and a loyalty that transcended the horrors of human conflict. When peace finally arrived, and the soldiers returned to homes forever changed by war, the terrier went with them, a living reminder of courage, hope, and the bonds that survive even the darkest times. Though medals could not fully honor his deeds, and newspapers struggled to capture the scope of his bravery, the dog's legacy endured. He had shown the world that heroism comes in many forms, and sometimes it walks on four legs, mud-streaked and fearless, in the heart of a war zone. And so, the little dog who had wandered into a trench, uncertain and untrained, became a legend. He reminded soldiers that even in the face of devastation, bravery could appear in the most unexpected places, and that hope could be found in the eyes of a loyal friend. The war had entered its second year, and the trenches had become a grim routine of mud, blood, and endless waiting. Soldiers moved like shadows, their faces pale from exhaustion, their hands numb from cold and fear. Yet amidst this endless despair, the terrier, no longer just a stray, had become an indispensable presence. He was more than a mascot. He was a guardian, a messenger, and for many, a source of hope in a world that seemed designed to crush it. It was in the early hours of a chilly autumn morning when the dog's true value became apparent once again. The regiment had been ordered to hold a forward position near a small ridge, a critical point that overlooked no man's land. Intelligence had suggested that the enemy was planning a surprise assault, but as usual, the details were sketchy at best. Soldiers huddled together, trying to keep warm in the thin, mud-streaked blankets that barely protected them from the biting wind. The terrier padded quietly between them, ears twitching, nose lifted to the cold air. Suddenly he froze. His body went rigid, his low growl vibrating through the trench like a warning drum. Soldiers followed his gaze, but all they saw was the gray mist rolling over the battlefield. The dog sniffed again, then darted forward, slipping past the mud and debris with uncanny speed. One of the officers, hesitant but desperate, called after him, "Wait, stop." But the dog was already gone, disappearing into the fog. Moments later, a faint sound reached the soldier's ears, a sharp whistle, then a series of rapid, urgent barks. They didn't understand it yet, but instinct told them to prepare. Then, emerging from the mist, the first waves of enemy soldiers appeared, moving cautiously, but too close for comfort. The terrier had seen them first, navigating the no-man's land like a tiny shadow, and now the soldiers had precious seconds to brace themselves. Rifles rang out, and chaos erupted. Bullets tore through the mist, artillery boomed in the distance, and the terrier weaved through it all, barking and dodging, moving with a kind of fearlessness that inspired the men around him. They fought with renewed determination, their morale lifted by the presence of the little dog who seemed to know no fear. Days turned into weeks, and the terrier's reputation only grew. He became a regular courier, carrying messages between positions that were otherwise impossible to reach. Soldiers often tried to follow him, but the paths he took were perilous, crossing shell-cratered ground, barbed wire, and open stretches where a single misstep could be fatal. Yet the dog moved like a spirit of the battlefield itself, swift, silent, and sure. One particular assignment tested him in ways no one could have imagined. An important message needed to reach the command post several miles away, but the usual routes were crawling with enemy patrols. Soldiers debated whether the journey was even possible, each suggestion met with doubt and fear. Then someone remembered the terrier. Without hesitation, they attached the message to a small pouch on his collar. The dog, seemingly aware of the responsibility, sniffed the air, tilted his head, and set off into the morning fog. The journey was treacherous. Shells exploded around him, sending dirt and debris flying. enemy snipers scanned the open ground, searching for any sign of movement. Yet the dog ran as if guided by some invisible hand, slipping past dangers that would have stopped a soldier in his tracks. Hours later, he arrived at the command post, exhausted but triumphant, delivering the message that would save countless lives. The officers could scarcely believe it. A small dog had accomplished what humans feared was impossible. But it wasn't only battlefield exploits that earned him admiration. The terrier had a remarkable sense for danger, often alerting soldiers to hidden threats before they were visible. Mines, snipers, and sudden enemy movements were detected long before anyone else could notice. Soldiers learned to trust his instincts, following his cues even when the situation seemed hopeless. There was a quiet bond that formed, unspoken but profound, a mutual understanding that survival often depended on more than just weapons and strategy. In quieter moments, when the gunfire paused and the men allowed themselves a rare moment of reflection, the terrier offered comfort. He would curl up beside a soldier shivering in the cold, resting his head gently on their lap. In the darkness of the trenches, his presence was a reminder that life and loyalty persisted even amidst death and despair. Soldiers began sharing stories about him, each tale growing larger with each telling. They spoke of his bravery, his speed, and his uncanny ability to navigate the horrors of war. The dog became a living legend, a symbol of hope in a world dominated by fear. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the clouds and the battlefield was painted in streaks of orange and gray, the terrier did something unexpected. A group of new recruits, green and terrified, had been assigned to hold a small outpost. They were frozen in indecision, unsure of what to do, as distant explosions rattled the earth. The terrier appeared quietly, circling them, nudging one soldier forward, barking encouragingly at another. Slowly, the recruits found their courage, inspired by the unwavering determination of a tiny dog in the middle of a war. His deeds were not without risk. There were days when he disappeared for hours, dodging shells and enemy patrols, and soldiers feared the worst. Yet, almost always, he returned, battered but alive, tail wagging, ready for the next challenge. He had survived storms of artillery fire, treacherous mud, and the constant threat of death, all while carrying out tasks that could mean life or death for the men he had grown to protect. As winter approached, the trenches froze solid, making every step treacherous. Yet the terrier adapted, learning to navigate the icy terrain with the same precision he had shown in mud and rain. Soldiers relied on him more than ever, sending him ahead to scout, deliver messages, or check dangerous areas. His bravery had become a lifeline, a small but vital thread holding together the fragile morale of men at the front. By now, the dog's fame had spread beyond his immediate regiment. Stories of the little terrier reached other units, and letters were sent home, describing the courage of a dog who had saved countless lives. Some wondered if it was exaggeration, but those who had served with him knew the truth. In a war defined by suffering and death, one small dog had made a profound difference. And yet, despite the acclaim and recognition, the terrier remained humble in his own way. He did not seek praise, did not understand medals or accolades. He lived simply, running, barking, and caring for the soldiers who had become his family. The battlefield, brutal and unforgiving, had made him a hero, but it had not changed his heart. He was still the same scrappy, determined dog who had wandered into a trench months earlier, now transformed into a symbol of courage that no one could forget. Winter had tightened its grip on the front lines. The trenches were frozen, and the once muddy earth had turned into a treacherous, jagged landscape. Soldiers' breaths came out in thick clouds, freezing instantly in the cold air, and frostbitten fingers struggled to hold rifles steady. Yet even in this harsh season, the little terrier pressed on, undeterred by the ice or the ever-present threat of enemy fire. He had become more than a companion. He was a symbol, a living heartbeat of hope that moved through the trenches when morale was dangerously low. One day, as dawn broke with a pale, sickly light, the regiment received word of a desperate situation. A squad had been cut off behind enemy lines, trapped in a ruined farmhouse surrounded by hostile soldiers. Communications had been lost, and supplies were dwindling. The commanding officer, faced with a nearly impossible decision, hesitated. Any attempt to reach the stranded men by conventional means could mean the loss of even more soldiers. That was when eyes turned to the terrier. He sat quietly in the corner of the command post, tail wagging faintly, ears alert. No one gave him orders, yet every soldier knew he understood. The dog was preparing for a journey that would test the limits of his courage and instinct. A small pouch was tied securely to his collar, containing the coordinates and instructions for the trap squad. With a quick glance around, as if to assure himself that the soldiers were watching and trusting him, the terrier slipped silently into the fog, disappearing into the frozen battlefield. The path was perilous. Craters from artillery blasts had created jagged holes in the earth, and the snow covered hidden dangers. Every step was a risk. Every sound could be an enemy soldier lying in wait. Yet the dog moved with remarkable precision, as if the chaos of war had no hold over him. His nose sniffed out danger before it was visible. His ears picked up the faintest hints of approaching footsteps, and his instincts guided him through paths even seasoned scouts would hesitate to take. Hours passed. Soldiers at the command post waited anxiously, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the dog. Then, in the distance, a small shadow appeared, moving steadily across the battlefield. The terrier had found the farmhouse. He barked urgently, signaling to the trap squad that help was coming and that instructions for escape had arrived. The soldiers inside, exhausted and disoriented, followed the guidance, sneaking past enemy patrols and hidden machine gun nests with the dog leading the way. By the time they reached safety, the terrier was limping slightly, his paws torn from ice and jagged debris, but his determination had not faltered. Soldiers lifted him into their arms, praising him and offering what little warmth and food they had. Yet despite the exhaustion, his eyes still sparkled with the same courage that had first caught the attention of those in the trenches. He was a hero, but in his own unassuming way, unaware of the extraordinary role he had played. The war dragged on, and the little dog's fame spread beyond the immediate regiment. Word reached headquarters, and even senior officers took notice. He was no longer just a stray who had wandered into the trenches. He had become a symbol of the bravery and loyalty that could exist even in the darkest hours of humanity. His actions inspired soldiers, lifted spirits, and reminded men that courage could be found in the most unexpected places. Yet war is relentless, and danger never relents. One bitter night, an enemy bombardment rained down on a forward position. The ground shook violently, and debris flew in every direction. Soldiers scrambled for cover, but the terrier, sensing the chaos, ran through the storm of destruction. He found a wounded soldier pinned under rubble and barked fiercely to draw attention. Others followed, pulling the soldier free just in time. The terrier, covered in mud and dust, seemed oblivious to his own injuries, focused solely on saving the life of another. Despite his small size, he had developed a near-legendary understanding of battlefield strategy. He would often appear where he was needed most, whether it was carrying messages through enemy lines, alerting soldiers to mines, or leading medics to the injured. His courage inspired others to act, to move forward when fear threatened to paralyze them. In countless ways, he had become a lifeline, a beacon of hope, and a reminder that even the smallest among us can make the biggest difference. During rare moments of respite, soldiers would gather around him, brushing mud from his fur and offering scraps of food. They spoke to him in soft, trembling voices, recounting the horrors they had witnessed and the friends they had lost. The dog would sit patiently, listening, his presence comforting in ways that no words could describe. In a war defined by death and despair, he was a constant reminder of life, loyalty, and courage. One particular story circulated among the troops, becoming almost mythic in its telling. A patrol had been ambushed, and a young soldier had been trapped under barbed wire while the enemy approached. The terrier, sensing the danger, darted into the line of fire, barking furiously, drawing the attacker's attention away long enough for the soldier to wriggle free. He returned, unscathed, to the soldiers' amazed and grateful faces. From that moment on, the little dog was not just a companion. He was a hero whose bravery had directly saved lives. By spring, as the snows melted and the war showed signs of reaching its final chapters, the terrier had endured more than most soldiers could imagine. Wounds, frostbite, exhaustion, and hunger had left their marks, yet his spirit remained unbroken. Every soldier who had served alongside him carried memories of his courage, and many vowed that if the war ended, the dog would be honored, remembered, and celebrated for the extraordinary life he had led amidst the chaos of human conflict. The terrier's legacy was growing, and not just among the soldiers at the front. Letters sent home described his heroics in detail, and soon his story began reaching newspapers and towns far from the battlefield. Children who had never seen a war imagined a small, fearless dog braving danger to save lives. Adults marveled at the idea that courage could come in such a small, unassuming package. He had become a symbol not only of bravery, but of the hope and resilience that persisted even in humanity's darkest hours. And through it all, the dog remained remarkably unchanged. He was not concerned with fame or recognition. He did not seek comfort or glory. He simply continued to do what he had always done: run, bark, and care for the soldiers who had become his family. In a world ruled by chaos and destruction, he was a constant, a hero in fur, mud, and determination, whose courage would live long after the echoes of war had faded. Spring had given way to summer, and the war showed signs of nearing its final chapters, though the battles remained brutal and relentless. Trenches were still churned with mud, the air thick with smoke and the stench of blood. Soldiers moved like shadows, their bodies worn, minds weary, and hearts heavy with loss. Yet, amid the chaos, the little terrier remained steadfast, his courage undiminished by the years of hardship. He had become an integral part of the regiment, a silent hero whose presence inspired men to keep going when every instinct urged them to despair. It was during one of these long, grueling campaigns that the dog faced perhaps his greatest challenge. Intelligence had reported that a crucial supply line had been cut off by enemy forces, leaving hundreds of soldiers stranded without food, ammunition, or medical supplies. The commanding officer knew that sending men through the area would likely result in heavy casualties, yet the supplies were desperately needed to hold the front. A plan was devised, an audacious one, reliant on the terrier's unique abilities. The dog was entrusted with carrying critical instructions across the battlefield to a nearby unit that could coordinate a rescue. The journey would be perilous, involving open ground exposed to snipers, shell fire, and treacherous terrain. The soldiers at the command post watched anxiously as the terrier's small form disappeared into the haze of dawn. They held their breath, praying that he would succeed. What followed was a test of courage unlike any before. The terrier darted through craters and twisted barbed wire, dodging bullets and debris with astonishing agility. Enemy patrols moved cautiously through the same area, unaware of the tiny figure moving with relentless determination. At one point, he was nearly trapped, a soldier from the enemy side spotting his movement and raising a rifle. In that instant, the dog flattened himself into the mud, remaining still as a shadow, then slipped away the moment the sniper's attention shifted. He reached the stranded unit and delivered the message with precision. The soldiers, astonished at the dog's timing and bravery, followed the instructions to coordinate a daring rescue operation. Supplies were brought in, wounded soldiers were evacuated, and the threatened position was secured, all thanks to the courage of a small dog who had navigated a battlefield that would have daunted even the bravest human. In the weeks that followed, the terrier's legend only grew. Stories of his heroics spread to nearby units, and even officers from distant commands heard of the little dog who had saved lives with no thought for his own safety. Soldiers began leaving scraps of food for him, marking his favorite paths in the trenches, and whispering words of admiration when they thought he wasn't listening. He had become a symbol, a morale booster, and a living testament to the power of courage and loyalty. Yet, despite his fame, the terrier remained remarkably humble. He did not seek accolades or praise. He continued to do what he had always done: run, carry messages, alert soldiers to danger, and comfort the wounded. He would weave between the legs of weary soldiers, offering a paw or a nuzzle, as if to say, "We are in this together." In a world filled with loss and fear, his simple acts of bravery and kindness reminded soldiers that hope could persist, even in the darkest hours. One sweltering afternoon, the dog faced a situation that would test every skill and instinct he had honed over years of war. A young soldier had become trapped in a collapsed trench, pinned beneath the heavy earth and debris. The soldier's cries were faint, almost lost amid the constant din of artillery, yet the terrier's keen senses picked up the sound immediately. He raced across the frozen, uneven ground, dodging falling shells and debris, until he reached the spot. Without hesitation, he began digging furiously, scratching with his small paws to move the earth enough for the soldier to breathe. His barks grew louder, echoing across the battlefield, drawing the attention of nearby comrades. Together, they uncovered the young man, pulling him to safety just in time. The soldier survived, and the terrier, though exhausted and covered in mud, seemed almost to shrug off the danger he had faced. Once again, he had risked his life for another, demonstrating bravery that few humans could match. As the months passed and the war edged closer to its conclusion, the terrier continued his tireless service. He had survived storms of artillery, freezing winters, and endless marches through mud and blood. He had navigated enemy territory, saved lives, carried messages, and comforted soldiers in their darkest hours. He had become more than a companion. He was a lifeline, a beacon of hope, and a hero whose story would endure far beyond the trenches of northern France. But the war had taken its toll. The dog bore scars from countless encounters, cut paws, bruises, and the faint memory of near misses. Yet his spirit remained unbroken, and his eyes, bright with determination, continued to inspire those around him. Soldiers who had come to rely on him knew that their survival often depended on his courage, and they marveled at how a creature so small could possess such indomitable bravery. In quieter moments, when the chaos of battle paused, soldiers would sit beside him, brushing mud from his fur, whispering words of gratitude, and offering scraps of food. He listened patiently, his presence a balm for weary hearts and minds. In a war defined by destruction and loss, he represented life, loyalty, and the enduring power of hope. The terrier's story began to reach beyond the front lines. Letters home described his heroics in vivid detail, and soon his legend spread to towns and villages far from the battlefield. Children imagined the little dog racing across shell-cratered fields, saving soldiers and carrying messages. Adults marveled at his courage, inspired by the idea that heroism could come in such an unexpected form. He had become more than a dog. He was a symbol, a living reminder that courage, loyalty, and hope could survive even in the most brutal circumstances. And through it all, he remained unchanged in spirit. Fame, medals, or recognition were meaningless to him. He did what he had always done: ran, barked, and cared for the soldiers who had become his family. In a world scarred by war, he was a constant, a hero in fur, mud, and determination, whose bravery and loyalty would be remembered long after the guns had fallen silent. By the time autumn approached, the war had begun to show signs of winding down. Yet the front lines remained dangerous, and soldiers knew that every day could be their last. The little terrier, now seasoned by years of battle, had endured more than most men could imagine. He bore scars from shrapnel, frostbite, and the relentless strain of survival, yet his spirit remained unbroken. Every soldier in the regiment knew that he was more than a mascot or companion. He was a hero, a lifeline, and a symbol of courage that could not be measured by medals or awards. It was during one of the final offensives that the dog faced his greatest challenge yet. A critical forward position had been overtaken by enemy forces, and a squad of soldiers was trapped behind a wall of debris and barbed wire. Communication lines had been destroyed, and the soldiers inside were running low on ammunition and supplies. The commanding officer looked at the terrier, who sat calmly, ears perked and eyes sharp, as if he understood the mission before it was even explained. with a small pouch tied securely around his neck containing instructions for the trap squad. The dog darted forward into the chaos. Shells exploded around him, sending mud and debris flying in every direction. Bullets whizzed past, some striking the ground mere inches from him, yet he pressed on, guided by instinct and an unwavering sense of purpose. Soldiers watched in awe as the small figure moved through the battlefield with precision, courage, and a determination that defied the very odds of survival. Reaching the trap squad, the terrier barked urgently, drawing their attention to the instructions. The soldiers followed his guidance, sneaking past enemy patrols and finding a safer route to retreat. The dog's presence had turned what could have been a fatal entrapment into a successful escape, saving dozens of lives. When the soldiers emerged from the battlefield, exhausted but alive, they lifted the terrier in their arms, praising him with tears and laughter. Even in the midst of war, there was joy and relief, and it was all thanks to this small, fearless dog. The dog continued to serve tirelessly until the armistice was declared. He had survived countless battles, harsh winters, and near-death experiences, yet he remained a constant source of hope and courage for the soldiers around him. His exploits were told and retold, from trenches to towns, from letters to newspapers. He became a symbol not only of bravery, but of the resilience and loyalty that can exist in even the darkest times. Soldiers spoke of him with reverence, children dreamed of him with wonder, and families far from the front lines read stories of his courage with awe. When the war finally ended and soldiers began to return home, the terrier's fate was a concern for those who had served with him. He had been more than a dog. He had been a companion, a guardian, and a hero. The men made arrangements to ensure he would have a home with one of the officers, a man who had witnessed firsthand the countless lives the dog had saved. Though medals and formal recognition could never fully honor the deeds of this brave animal, they wanted him to live out the rest of his days in comfort, away from the mud and blood of the battlefield. The terrier adapted quickly to civilian life, though he never lost the instincts and courage that had defined him during the war. He would still alert people to danger, comfort those in distress, and exhibit the same loyalty that had saved so many soldiers' lives. In his quiet way, he continued to inspire those around him, proving that heroism is not always loud or visible. It can be found in the steadfast devotion of a small, determined heart. His story endured far beyond his lifetime. Books were written, articles published, and children's tales told about the brave dog who had served in World War I. Monuments and commemorations honored him alongside human soldiers, recognizing that courage and heroism can come in many forms. The dog's legacy became a symbol of hope, bravery, and the extraordinary bond between humans and animals, a bond that can endure even amidst the chaos of war. Though he was gone, the memory of the terrier remained alive in the hearts of those who had known him and in the stories that traveled across generations. Soldiers who survived because of his courage carried his story home, telling their children and grandchildren about the small, fearless dog who had defied danger time and time again. He had shown the world that heroism is not measured by size or strength, but by the courage to act, the loyalty to protect, and the willingness to face fear head-on. Even today, more than a century later, the story of the dog who became a war hero in World War I serves as a reminder that greatness can emerge from the most unexpected places. He had been a small, scrappy terrier with no formal training, yet he had saved lives, carried messages through enemy lines, and inspired soldiers when hope seemed lost. His courage was not born from glory or recognition, but from an innate sense of duty and loyalty, a reminder that even the smallest among us can leave a mark on history. In the end, the terrier's life was a testament to the extraordinary bond between humans and animals, and to the resilience of the spirit in times of unimaginable hardship. He had wandered into a trench as an unknown stray, but he left the battlefield as a legend, a hero whose bravery and loyalty would be remembered long after the guns fell silent. And in the hearts of those who witnessed his courage, he would forever remain a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, light and heroism can come from the most unexpected places.